We want to hear your take on this first story and every story today. We're going to kick off with James Corden. I think he's in your neck of the woods over there, Lauren. Well, unfortunately, he is facing criticism for being culturally insensitive with his Spill Your Guts segment. That's where he dares celebrities to either answer a personal question or eat something gross. And a TikTok user pointed out in a viral video that a lot of the food that he is profiling and showing as gross actually are very common foods in Asia, parts of Asia. So let me kick this off with you, Lauren. Is this culturally insensitive?
You know, I kind of think it is. Whenever we start putting judgment on a specific food that is definitely native to a specific region, I do think that you kind of are stepping potentially on those toes. And to that point, I feel like it's important to note that other cultures could view things that in North America, we think are quite normal as being gross. I think that there's other cultures who might think a double quarter pounder with cheese is quite gross. So I think, there are ways to kind of play that same game that don't apply adding a judgment, like do the hot wings challenge. What kind of spice can you handle? I just feel like by labeling something as being gross, you're going to run into this issue potentially if it's, again, native to another region.
It's so interesting what you're saying, Lauren. And also it's like, when it comes to food, we have such strong visceral reactions. And part of the reason why I think this is because it's our first pleasure, right? As babies, we learn the connection between love. And as we get older, it's about culture. There's so many things embedded in the pleasure of food. And also, we all have a built-in human mechanism for disgust. And I think, evolutionarily speaking, it's meant to protect us from things that could possibly harm us. I think that both things are very human. I came across this article that was talking about, I don't know if you've heard about this, but Sweden has this thing called a disgusting food museum. And it features 80 dishes from around the world. And you actually get a barf bag when you go in. So they have everything from maggot infested cheese. This comes from Sardinia, to sheep eyeball juice. It's from Mongolia. The quote unquote worst item is apparently an Icelandic fermented shark, which has been described as the experience of eating it has been described as chewing on a urine-soaked mattress. So anyway, the interesting thing about this is the guy who started this wasn't doing it as a kind of like, just necessarily obviously gross out experience. I think he's making a commentary about what leads certain cultures at certain times to explore different kinds of foods. And a lot of them come from struggle. And what you said, Lauren, about how our shifting changes depending on where we are, there are many foods here, you're right, that are disgusting. In fact, Lainey, this whole story made me think about the fact that, remember in season 1, I was still breastfeeding Jaya and I was pumping. And we kind of had this idea, we thought, we'll go on the social and you can drink my breast milk. And the reaction was, no way, people will be totally disgusted by this. And I think probably people watching are like, yeah, I'm grossed out by that. But this is a human to human. Like, we drink that as babies, many of us, and yet we would have been sort of grossed out. And yet, Lainey, you did drink it. What was the experience of that like? Off camera.
It was non-remarkable.
Excuse me.
I don't remember how it tasted.
You said it was sweet.
Like, if it didn't lodge in my memory, it was just one of those things. Big reaction for really not that special of a taste. But yeah, like, maybe I need to try it again. I don't know. Anyone offering?
Okay, if we could go back to James Corden just for a hot second here, because I like what you were saying, Lauren, that it all depends on perspective, where your butt happens to be sitting in the world. There's a lot of practices here. There may be some cultures that look at how we eat different animals, livestock, as like our own version of, whoa, Westerners do that? That seems unethical, or that sounds gross. And so, yeah, there's definitely all a matter of where you happen to be sitting in the world. But can we extend this to where we happen to be in the Western world in terms of discussions about race? The next frontier in racial reckoning for, I think, all of us is finding out that racism is not just built into infrastructure like the criminal justice system or the education system. It's also built into businesses. And historically, a lot of East Asian cuisine, specifically Chinese, in many cases, at least in Canada, were and maybe in many cases still is looked down upon as a lesser food because, newsflash, we were really, really racist against Chinese people specifically at the turn of the century, and that century being the 1900s. And so there is not, to me, a separation between how we view food today and a lot of the built-in racism that people look down upon with their elitist food snobbery at particularly East Asian food, and then the lineage to our very racist history and treatment of Chinese people in Canada. To me, follow the line. It is one and the same. And so that's where I do think, while I won't blame James specifically, those two things are not separate for me. And I think we need to examine that.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there, Mel, about racism can be rooted in like food. And it reminds me of, there was a controversy in New York, don't know if you all remember, a couple of years ago, where a white couple opened a Chinese food restaurant. And the marketing around the restaurant was, this is clean Chinese food, right? Oof. And so some of the words that were thrown around were, I'm doing this because Chinese food often makes me feel bloated and icky. Those are direct quotes from the person who was promoting this restaurant, one of the co-owners. And there was a lot of backlash because there is this pervasive stereotype about East Asian food and Chinese food in particular being unclean, dirty, not good for you, right? So what you were saying, Mel, about this, the quality judgment of foods from certain areas around the world, like when we talk about high-end restaurants and what we're willing to go to a restaurant to pay whatever, $50 a plate or however much is charged at these high-end restaurants, you will find that there are a lot of people who refuse to pay, $50, $60, $70 for a Chinese entree because it has been like low class. It has been treated like an unelegant food. But the same foodie culture prizes, flavors that have been developed over centuries. Chinese food has literally been developed over centuries. Like, we're one of the oldest cultures. These are flavors that were around like 300, 400, 500 years ago. But somehow we don't get into that food culture trendiness. Or when we do, it's when white people repurpose ingredients that are commonly used in East Asian cuisine and put them into their menus. Like the really good example for this is pork belly. Do you remember the pork belly craze of like 5 years ago? And how expensive it was? It drove up the price of pork belly around the world. Well, in Asian markets, people were like, what is this? We used to get this for 5 cents. And all of a sudden, the white people are eating it and we have to pay so much more for it, but you thumb your nose at it at an Asian restaurant. That's an example of how frustrating it is to be a member of East Asian culture, specifically our food, and to see these things happen.